we actually have to look inside. So this is about resolving the conflicts inside of ourselves. Where are we where we don't feel like we're in alignment? Where are we where we're not pono inside of ourselves? Where are we where we're not in integrity or living in authenticity? Because if that is not happening here, it's never going to happen out here.
My guest today is James Kawainui. James is a kahuna, author, and speaker who blends ancestral Hawaiian wisdom with neuroscience and energy practices to help people release trauma, shift generational patterns, and restore balance. With a lineage of over 20 generations in Hawaii, his work helps people reconnect to their purpose and inner harmony. Hi, friends. Welcome back to Call Cut with Angelique. I'm Angelique, and today I have a very special guest with me. Now, James, I want to make sure that I say your name right. James Kawainui?
Kawainui, just like the island Kauai with Nui on the end.
Kawainui. Oh, I love that. Okay, so I didn't have it right. Okay, well, can't be perfect. No. James, I am really excited to have you on the show for so many different reasons, but we are new connection. We just literally met twice, one time on a live stream with the fabulous Mike Ashabranner, and now we met after that, and now here. You are someone who I am super interested in because you have a lot of information about Ho'oponopono. And a lot of people have heard of Ho'oponopono, mostly from the book Zero Limits, which, has been around for a long time. And what really got me about you is you are actually dispelling the myth behind this sort of commercialized version of Ho'oponopono. So I would love for you to tell our audience a little bit about you, and let's just get right into it.
It sounds really good, and I'm really happy to be here. I just want to say aloha, everyone. Thank you, and super excited to be here today. My name is James Kawainui. I'm a Native Hawaiian healer. My family goes back on Hawaii Island, the Big Island, over 20 generations, and they've been doing this work, this very sacred work, and that is helping people understand themselves, helping people understand energy and how energy moves through the world. They come from a lineage. I come from a lineage of what people would say are kahuna. I can say that now because I've been recognized. It's not a title that you give yourself. It's a title that's bestowed upon you. And that happened about 1.5 years ago. So I'm grateful to have that now as part of how I describe what I do. And I'm just happy to be here today. I mean, we can go into a lot more, but I think I'll stop there for right now.
Okay. Yeah. So, James, well, for people who don't know, Ho'oponopono became kind of popular again, I should say, in 2007 with the Zero Limits. And it's this idea that you have this phrase, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And you repeat this as a chant, ultimately to clear out your karma and to clear out your space and etc. But as with everything that's commercialized, things get oversimplified. And we start to believe that these things are in their full mythology, which apparently they are not. And so James actually has taken this Ho'oponopono to a whole other level. And he has a book that's coming out, which he's going to tell you about. And he also teaches us, right? If I'm not mistaken.
I do, exactly.
What I would love to talk to you about, James, a little bit is where did they go wrong, or where is this kind of zigging when it should have zagged? We have all of this information, by the way, with so many different things, right? Here we go. I'm not a big surprise that now we're finding out, okay, well, that's not quite how Ho'oponopono works. It's a much deeper practice from what I understand.
It is. And here to give people context, what happens inside of science, right? And then what happens inside of our society. So I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a back step so that we can actually, I can explain this. I'm going to take medicine. I'm going to take allopathic medicine. I'm going to take pharmaceutical medicine. Initially, what was happening is that in prior lifetimes or in prior generations, they were herbalists and they were naturalists and they were healers, and they understood the power of plants and what plants had and what they had available to us for healing. Well, when pharmaceuticals came along and allopathic medicine came along, what they did was they thought, well, if I extract that information out of the plant and I get that one ingredient and I synthesize it, I'm going to have something that's going to be way more powerful than plant medicine was in the beginning. And so
Hmm.
that's where our society has gone over the last, I would say, 120 years, 130 years. And what happens inside of that, and my teacher in New Zealand was the best way, he explained this the best way that anybody else I've ever said. He said, when they did that, what they did is they took the spirit out of that medicine. And so,
Whoa.
yeah, I'm going to stop there so you can kind of let that sink in.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah. Most people
Huge.
don't think about modern pharmaceuticals that way, but modern pharmaceuticals came from the naturalists and the herbalists that were working, 300, 400, 1,000, 2,000 years ago, that understood the plant, but they understood the spirit that was inside of the plant as well. So
Right.
for indigenous culture, that still exists. And they're constantly looking for that next plant, that next derivative, that next synthesized substance that's going to take everything to the next level. And the reality is that when as much as you do that, even you look at it, and I know we're dancing around, but GMO is the same thing. When we genetically modified plants, we took the spirit and the essence out of the plant, and so we're creating something that literally is inert, that doesn't have
Huh.
and our bodies don't recognize it, which is why the things that happen to us, because the body doesn't recognize the modified version of it. It's still looking for the organic original version.
This makes so much sense. So much sense because people have more allergies than they ever did before. People are having aversions to things that they never had aversions to before. The taste of certain things, I mean, some things taste rubbery and I mean, actually you could bend different fruit. I mean, it's really, really horrifying. But spirit heals spirit. So that makes a lot of sense that all of a sudden foods that used to be life-giving are absolutely just devoid of any
Devoid of
sort of energetic nutrient.
And so, as a native Hawaiian healer, or as a practitioner, and in Hawaiian culture, we understood the movement of energy. We understood energy in a way deeper way. We understood the movement of energy. We understood what energy can and it could do, it both in for good and not for good. So that, there's always the the shadow side of what we do, right? And so coming back to Ho'oponopono, um, w it's better, or it's easier, or to put it in context, if we break it down and we understand what the word actually means. So Ho'o in Hawaiian language, and just really quick lesson in Hawaiian language. If you take it and you look at the word and you say it phonetically, you're pretty much going to be correct all the time, because it's a very phonetic language. So if you break it down into the syllables and you do it phonetically, just like Kawainui, Honolulu. So Huma huma nuku nuku apuaha. However you want to look at that. If you break it down, it becomes easier. So if you break Ho'oponopono down and you take the root words, or you take the words and spread them apart. Ho'o in Hawaiian language is a way of emphasizing something. So it gives emphasis to something. And then pono is really the root word of pono is of ponopono is pono. And so we start with the word pono. And what pono means, and if I was to pull out the Hawaiian dictionary and give you the definition, pono has about 20 different definitions. And that's one of the cool things about Hawaii, is that one word can have so many different derivatives and so many different meanings. But basically, what I see pono is righteous, pono is right, pono is about right action and right thinking, pono is about being in balance. So when you look at the word Ho'oponopono, and if you looked in the Hawaiian dictionary, I swear to you, you look in the Hawaiian dictionary and you looked up the word Ho'oponopono, there would be two words in there, and it says "to correct." That's it. So what we're actually doing is we're correcting. The question is, what are we correcting? In 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 its original version, Ho'oponopono is a ceremony. It's a sacred ceremony, and what happens is when Hawaiians found Hawaii. It's about 1,600 years ago when they sailed. They knew Hawaii was there. They could tell by being able to read the ocean. And the ocean isn't the Polynesian navigators were really amazing because they could read waves and they could read the way waves came together and the way that waves rippled across the surface. And they could tell if there were islands out there. And they knew Hawaii was there because there was a prophecy of another place and so they sailed and they found it. And when they landed, they realized they literally had found paradise. There was everything that they needed there to sustain themselves. There was a lush, fertile land. There was bounty from the ocean. It was everything that was there. So they lived for several generations, and then they found out after several generations that resources are actually finite. If you don't pay attention to the resources that you have, they become and so what they understood was that they had to learn how to live with the land and live with the ocean. And so there were seasons of for different things, even seasons for the fish that came through in the ocean. And part of that reckoning of all of that was realizing that every person in the community was an essential cog in a wheel for survival, for well-being, for everyone.
Mm.
Which means that everyone had a critical part of everybody's wellness, right? So the fisherman and the farmer and the kapa maker who made the cloth and the rope maker and the carver that carved the hooks for the fishing and the kahu, which is the kahuna, kahu, which is priest, who kept the spiritual balance of everybody that was there. And the people that worked in the mountains, people that worked near the ocean. So everybody worked. And so what happens is when you're in a community and you're working, often you would get conflict. It's natural. We're humans, right? So we were left to be able to deal with the conflict that we had and would hopefully be able to work through it, come back into pono, come back into right action and right place and integrity inside of ourselves so that we could actually resolve whatever was going on. When that disagreement became so large that it not only has started to affect the people, but it started to affect the community, then everybody looked around and said, "Okay, wait a minute, we have to do something about this." In my research, and this is what I've been able to find. I'm not saying that I'm definitive, but in my research, prior to European contact, we didn't even have a word for Ho'oponopono. It was just something that was innate inside of our culture. And so what would happen is the two parties that were in conflict with each other would decide that they would come together and they would pick an elder or a kahu, somebody in the community, to say, okay, we know that we can't solve this and we need some help. So you're going to be, we pick you as the mediator, somebody to hold space, somebody to explain the rules of engagement. And so once that happened, then everybody agreed. Then they kind of went and they got ready for the ceremony. And so Ho'oponopono becomes a ceremony. And before everyone even came together, they were to sit inside of themselves and they would meditate. They would do not only spiritual cleansing, but they would do physical cleansing as well. So they would clear their body and their mind so that when they came together, they would understand, they would be in the best possible position to find a resolution. And so the ceremony would begin. And the kahu would bring everybody together. And once the ceremony began, you were together until there was some kind of resolution that was found. And so after prayer and explanation of the ground rules, then if it was two people, what would happen is they would get to sit together and each in turn would be able to say everything that they needed to. They would get their emotions, their places, the places where they think that this conflict is out of alignment. And the cool thing about this is that the person that was on the other side of the table, all they could do was listen. And that's a really huge piece because in our modern culture, who listens to each other anymore? We don't. I'm sitting here because I have a conflict with you. I'm telling you what's going on. You're in your head. You're coming up with reasons why, and so you're not even paying attention. So heart of Ho'oponopono is deep listening and communication. And so once that person was done, then the other person would have their chance. And if there was more people that were involved inside of it, and a lot of times Ho'oponopono was inside of families. And so everybody would have a chance to say what they said. Nobody could interrupt them. No interruptions, which is pretty powerful if you just think about that process.
This is really interesting. My God, I have so many things I have to say now because I'm going through in my mind like, oh, I got to say that. So there's two things. One, this is so in alignment with shadow work, right? Having to really look at the part you play in the conflict or in the disagreement or the traumas, dramas, et cetera, that we have to deal with. So that's really an interesting tool to get down into the shadow and really start to examine it. The second thing, what you were talking about, active listening, we don't actively listen. We do not listen to hear, we listen to speak. And that means that most people shut off the moment you say something to them that they want to click in on. They absolutely shut off and they begin formulating a response to that one part of what you said, which is why we have so many miscommunications. Because a person often, and not always, but they often resolve a thought if you allow them to completely finish their thought, right?
Yes.
But we don't. We cut them off mid-sentence because we either don't like what they have to say or we're ready to defend ourselves. And we never let them get to the point where they actually finish their complete thought. And in that moment, they become enraged because now you've cut them off and now they're angry again, even if they were moving to resolution. So this is a really powerful ritual or practice because it allows for people to really have to sit and listen to another human being and take that in.
I want to teach this to every HR manager in every company.
Yeah. Well, it's deeply needed.
You know, and not just there, but in companies, and not only there, but I really think about this in governments and places where we come together. So back to the ceremony now. So inside of the ceremony, once everybody has had their chance to say, then the kahu, the mediator, would say, okay, are we ready to look for a solution? If they are, then they talk about what that solution is. And if not, then he says, okay, well, you go back and sit with what you heard. You go back and listen to what, take in what you heard from everyone else or from the other person. And then you look at where you are inside of this. And so you're right. There's a place where I say this to people, our lives change when we start realizing and taking responsibility for the choices that we made and where we are in our life. And for most people, taking responsibility for the things that they've said or done can be very challenging, especially in our modern lives, because that there's a level of responsibility and self-integrity and authenticity that's inside of that. And so they would go back and they would contemplate, they would look, they would meditate inside of that and go, okay, how can we find resolution? And so it would be a process of coming back. And sometimes it happens quickly. Sometimes it could go on for weeks, when people are stubborn. So we get to watch our stubbornness. We got to watch our inability to let go of our point of view, which, point of view is a very big thing right now.
Oh, yeah. That's for sure.
And
Yeah.
come back where there's finally resolution. And when there was resolution, then there would be different things that would happen. Is it compensation? Is it absolution? Is it forgiveness? Is it repayment or repatriation of some kind of compensation, right? So where it got taken out of context is when they said Ho'oponopono is about forgiveness. And they pulled it out of everything else that was there.
Yeah, that dilutes it.
That dilutes it. Not only again, it took the spirit out of it, right? It took the energy, the mana. Hawaiians would call it mana. It took the power out of it. And so in Ho'oponopono, when there is complete resolution and everybody agrees, this is not consensus, this is unanimous agreement that this is where we are, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to move forward. the agreement inside of that at the very beginning and again at the end is stress is that once this situation is closed, we don't talk about it anymore.
Ooh, that's it. That's the golden key right there. That's the
So
golden key.
how many of us carry things?
And how many of us carry things that we thought were resolved, but somebody else decides that the wound is, they're just going to keep perpetuating the wound. You know, and I don't know how you feel about this, but we don't realize that there's many different archetypes within the stories. You're not simply just a victim and you're not simply just, the one who's inflicting pain, right? And so why I find this interesting is it doesn't really allow for you to continue or perpetuate a story. It puts closure to the story through that healing.
Through that healing, and looking for that common ground. Where do we meet? We're going to disagree on all these other things, but can we find some place that we agree in, that there's common ground and we can see each other, right?
Yeah. That's the hardest thing for humans, in my opinion, to do is, we are not different in many ways. We're all very similar. We just express ourselves differently and we have different perspectives. But we the machine operates similarly for all human beings. So if we really put our minds to it, we have more in common than we don't.
We do. And what do all humans want? What do we want in the end, really?
I personally believe it's to be loved.
Love,
and to be heard.
And appreciated.
Yeah.
Right?
Which, and it all falls under the same category where people are respected for who they are and accepted, right?
Yeah.
Within all aspects of them. Mm-hmm.
And that's it. And it doesn't matter religion or sexual preference or color of skin or ethnicity or nationality. We all still want the same things. And so what would it be like to start from there and then see how we can work forward, and I really see this. I see Ho'oponopono in this context as a way of resolving a lot of things that are happening in the world. When people are ready to come together and say, I really am ready to talk. I really am ready to figure this out. Because why should we be killing each other still after thousands of years? And it gets to a point where it makes absolutely no sense. That original conflict that happened, whenever it happened, right? Do we even really understand what that is anymore? And I mean, there's so many things that come into this, and Angelique, because we're talking about the cellular memory and the generational programming that we have and everything else.
Yes.
So, and I don't think that's a conversation for today because we could get lost on it.
It's big. It's big. But what you're saying is right on. The bloodline entanglements and the DNA and things that we're carrying through do very much play out today. And this is why this kind of work to cut the story is important. Because what you said is true. We don't even know the origin story for most of these things.
No.
All we know is it's serving a purpose for certain agendas.
Yeah.
And that agenda is then at the detriment to a great number of people, to their freedom, to their life, to their health, and to their well-being. And so how do we as a collective come together and say, we're going to lift and change this consciousness from this conflict consciousness to this collaboration consciousness?
I think we have to learn how to do that on an individual basis and be willing to step into that space. And then as we do that, then in our relationships, we start to look for that kind of resolution and that kind of mutual respect, common ground. And then, because really generations ago, there's always been conflict, but there was always places where we met, and not to go into religion or anything else like that, but church was one of those places, or religion was one of those places where we could come together, even if for that short period, to be able to have a common focus. And is this happen? Yes. As the agenda changed, I love what you said, the agenda behind everything that and changes.
I always say to people, whenever they're in a conflict with somebody, or if it's a fighting over something larger, right? People losing family members over politics, over that. who gains from that? We always have to see who benefits from your pain, from your sorrow, from the things that are in conflict or, in contrast with you, because there's always someone or something that gains from that. And if it's not you and you're not really getting to your highest and best self, then there has to be a moment where we stop ourselves and say, all right, this isn't working. There has to be a better way. Now, there is a question I have about the Ho'oponopono.
Mhm.
Where did the whole I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you, peace come into that?
That is murky. I can say that to you. And when I
Okay.
went back and I looked, and as far as I can tell, and this is not to point fingers at anybody or anything, um, that did not come through our culture. That would be the best way that I could say that. That would be non-confrontational. That did not come through
Mhm.
our culture. That was something
Yeah,
that was either created or modified outside.
for marketing.
Well, if we're being totally honest, you have to agree that that was some brilliant marketing.
Oh, no, it absolutely, because one of the things that marketing teams will do when they're trying to hone in on a healer or somebody that they can really put out in the mass market sort of arena is to find a tool. They want something that people can use, that they can go right to, 5 steps to do this or this to do that. And so in that way it was brilliant because people now had a tool to get them to this point. They could recite these things over and over and over again. But it ultimately dilutes the whole purpose. And as you said, it takes the spirit out of the actual practice.
Now, for me personally, it's not to disavow, whatever the practice is, because self belief is a big piece inside of that. And so, if people believe that that mantra is going to help them, then as they move and they do the mantra, obviously it is, because where our mind goes is where we go, and so they
Mhm.
put the energy into it. So, there is a psychology of that. If there's self belief, then it will work. The only rub that I had, and really, I have to say this, that this is not my choice to write this book. This is not my choice to stand up and say we have to do something about this. This is my ancestors talking to me, and they started talking to me 7 or 8 years ago, and they said, because I kept feeling it was just like you when you and I talked. You said you kept feeling like something was off there, and and
Yes.
and I kept looking at that, and I kept thinking, God, something is really off there, because I was getting ready. I was going to go do the certification course and get the things so that I could say that I could do Ho'oponopono. And every time I did that, it was like this place that kind of went, oh man, I don't know about that. And so then the ancestors, the Hawaiian colony, Hawaiians, we call it our kupuna, our ancestors. They said you have to make this right. You cannot keep letting this
Mhm.
misunderstanding go. And I was in resistance for a really long time, and then I finally said, okay, I'm going to start. And so I started writing a book, and the book just became this backdrop of one, giving people a little bit about the understanding of our culture so that they could see where that was, explaining the process, and then looking at that, because inside of that process of Ho'oponopono, even though we were looking at resolution and of whatever was happening here, we actually have to look inside. So this is about resolving the conflicts inside of ourselves. Where are we where we don't feel like we're in alignment? Where are we where we're not pono inside of ourselves? Where are we where we're not in integrity or living in authenticity? Because if that is not happening here, it's never going to happen out here, or it would be more challenging. Let's just say, for it to happen out here. So as I wrote the book, I said, okay, now we understand what the process is. How can we bring that home so that me as an individual, I can work through this process of realizing what the pattern is, looking at how the issues showed up, taking responsibility, and what's my resolution or my atonement inside of that for myself. And so as I went through the book, I kind of laid that out so that people have what I wanted when they finish reading this book is I want people to be able to have a way of managing and looking at resolving conflict in their own lives, not just with family or people, but inside themselves. At the end of every chapter, I call them thoughts for contemplation. So I wanted this to be a journal as well, so that they could journal their progress and they could journal their path and whatever I'm going to call it tool or process that they come up with.
That's beautiful. I see I'm always conflicted, and I'll be super honest with you. I totally believe the same thing you do, that, you do something enough, that belief becomes, that, how can I say this? The mantra, whatever, becomes your belief, etc. However, one of the things that I feel maybe your ancestors know more than we do is that when things are not fully aligned with the original intention, it doesn't really hold in the way it should change. A transformation doesn't really happen, right?
It's like GMO.
Yeah, it's because it's great, and in the moment it may work for a short time, right? But the actual issue never really gets resolved. It's almost like putting a Band-Aid over it. And the minute that person gets triggered again, or that person comes up to and has to face something, maybe let's say a little deeper. And that's really what happened with me. And why I noticed these things didn't work for me is like in the moment you feel good because you're like, oh, this is working and I'm resolving, but I'm not, because
Until
I'm
the
not
trigger shows up.
right. Because on the surface, you know what I would say? It's what I call a micro change.
Mm.
It changes a little bit of something, right? Because the belief is that this is working and I'm feeling great, until, God damn the universe, they throw one more thing at you and you're like, oh, okay, and I'm right back here. Now, I may be a little wiser, but I'm here. And I think maybe what your ancestors have done through you, and you could confirm or deny, is they've said, okay, that's great, but now you need to give people this opportunity to really use this powerful ritual to help them fully heal, not just partially.
Fully heal, because it really does come down to, and this is my journey in my life, is coming down to really having to take responsibility and ask the ugly questions about yourself, and to get
Yeah.
really, really, really honest.
Yes.
And part of that honesty and part of that self-inquiry is also watching, because this is our nature, watching how often we drop into self-judgment. Because the
Hmm.
self-judgment doesn't allow us to get all the way past or get down into really looking at the resolution. And you're right
Yes.
about what you said, because I would meet people, because when I before COVID, and I was teaching it live, and people would come up to me after a class and they would talk to me about Ho'oponopono, and they would talk to me about doing the practice and the mantra and coming to this place, and they would say, I'm I'm good inside myself. I found that space. I'm at peace. And this is nothing against them, but I would look inside and I would go, I see what you're talking about. Behind all of that, there was still all of this unsettledness, and there was still all these pieces that were unresolved. And I would press them. Sometimes I would ask, I said, okay, do I press them on this? And the team would say, yes, press them. And I would. And then some people would break down in tears and say, you're right. You know, I want this to be better. I'm doing my best.
Yeah.
I haven't got there.
Yeah. Because we find blankets, we find things that can cover us up and hold on to us for a little while, but they don't go the distance. And one of the things I talk about, well, this, so it would be by the time this comes out, it would be the podcast before. But I talk about the shadow work because my husband's always like, you say shadow work in all of these podcast episodes, but you don't explain it. So I explain it. And one of the things I said is exactly what you said, which is we have to take responsibility for all of our parts, right? The traumas, the dramas, the good, the bad, the ugly, the scared, the beautiful. If we don't take responsibility for all of it, we don't ever get to really understand ourselves, because we are here. Everything's contrast here, and we're contrast, and we're told everything in life is a battle between good and evil. No, it's an integration between the dark and the light parts of our soul.
It's the balance of the polarity that's there.
Yep.
I laugh, and I make joke of this, but there is that faction inside of wellness of the peace, love, and light group, right? all I want to see is the good in the world and the peace and the love and everything else like that. And that's how I live. That's how I live. That's how I live. And yet there's a shadow side that what they're doing really, and this is how I see it, is they're taking a large amount of their energy, pushing all of that away and trying to keep it at bay so they don't have to look at it. And so here we are talking about all these beautiful things in our life. And yet there's this whole other side that's unresolved. And in the beginning, in Hawaiian mythology, there was the po and the ao, so the night and the day. And it was always the balance of the two, because without the shadow, how will we know what the light looks like? Without the light, how will we know what the shadow looks like? And so to disavow that other side, the shadow work side of you, is to negate part of who you are, part of your soul.
That's right. Yeah, and there is a thing called false light, which a lot of these people, and you know what I mean. And
Yeah,
it's funny.
I call it spiritual bypass.
There you go. And I call and I also have the unhealed healers, and the other day I came up with a Gaga guru, which is basically a baby soul that wants to be a guru in this world and wants to project, but hasn't actually done the work. And the one thing about us having books and books and books is that we get a lot of information, right? But that information has to be integrated. It doesn't truly become wisdom until it's married through, your intuition, and you take all different perspectives and you start to lay it out and you see the patterns and you start to realize where those paths are kind of showing themselves. And so where my heart breaks, and I think this is going to be something great that you're bringing into the world, is what about the folk that are in a lot of pain, that aren't the faux light, oh, love and light with the affected speech, that are really looking for somebody that they can relate to, somebody that they can understand is like, oh my God, this person is having the human experience with me. And that's what I think this brings to the table, is to say, hey, you don't have to be, oh my God, love and light and peace and I remember, and then I remember being at a what are those sessions, whatever they are, those retreats, and this woman is, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I curse like a sailor, and I right, and I'm like, this isn't gonna happen. She's all like, coming out of a clamshell, and I'm over here, in a beat up old Bentley, like we're not the same. And my machine has been through hell and back, and you seem to have miraculously lifted yourself through all of it. And the reason I say that becomes a turnoff is because it becomes an unattainable thing, because it's not real.
That spiritual perfection. And that's really what happens. I have to be perfect inside of this. And back to what you were saying, we do all of these and we take all these courses and we do everything that we do, and it keeps us in a safe place. And the safe place is it stays conceptual. And so it is all concept. Well, I know how to do that because I learned how to do that. I know this thing and this thing and this thing is all concept, but it doesn't land.
Right.
And it has to land, because concept has to be this place where I start to understand it. And so for me, the way that I look at that is that if you don't understand how energy is moving to your body and what it's doing, and where the emotions are caught or how it's holding into your body, because you don't want to look, right?
Yeah.
Most people live from here to here.
Yep.
And it's kind of one of the first things I do when people come to me. I says, first thing we're going to do is we're going to put you in your body, give you an experience of what energy feels like when it's moving through you, so that you can actually start to recognize, because it's not your mind that's really telling you what's going on. It's actually how
It's your heart.
acting and what your body is telling you, that really is important inside of this.
Yeah. People are terrified of the lower chakras, which is interesting. Yeah, and I don't know, I'm strange. I love the lower chakras, but I will tell you, you will totally appreciate this. I went to this healer in New York City. He was amazing. Okay, like this guy, but the crew I went with was a crew of people that were with my dad, and these guys were all like these devotees of Sai Baba, and they had their own thing going on. This guy brings us through a meditation, and oh my God, James, I mean, I saw some dark stuff, right? I was like, whoa. when we came out of it, he went around asking everybody, what did you see? What did you see? And they're like, oh my God, the angels came down. And as they're going around, I'm like, whoa. When he gets to me, and people had different experiences. He gets to me and I said, I don't know. I saw like demons and weird, like bearded people and all this like fire. And he's like, well, you're the only one who actually went through the meditation because he goes, you would have never seen angels and all that. What we were doing was really deep into the first chakra, into the earth chakra. He's like, so all of that. And he called it out, which I thought was really interesting. And I'm sweating. And he said to me after, he said, you're going to learn on your journey that people are terrified of the lower chakras.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. And he said, have compassion, because I was this is my dad and a bunch of his friends, so he's like, have compassion. They're scared of it. They don't really want to go there. So they don't actually let themselves go there. They will be there present, but they don't fully embody in that meditation.
That's because people are afraid of feeling what that is. That is really what it comes down to. We're afraid of feeling what our emotions are actually trying to tell us. And so we spend amazing amounts of energy, precious life force energy, precious mana that you have available to live your life, pushing all of that away. And so, yes, you want to attain enlightenment, and yet there's an anchor, or there's this thing that's sitting there that is begging to be heard or even recognized, so that you can actually start on that path, so
Yeah.
I my belief is that that's going to change, and that's starting to change, that people are really starting to look at and wanting to do the deeper work, because it's where they're going to go. And they're not going, and I will say this, and I am not even going to this is another place where we could go down a rabbit hole. There are no shortcuts.
Right.
There's no medicine that you're going to take that's going to get you there without going through the dirty stuff. And so I say to people, transformation is ugly and it's dirty, and you gotta really be okay getting your hands dirty and stepping in the mud, and it's, excuse my language, smelling like shit for a little while, because it is. And that's the only way you're gonna get through it.
Yeah. And the only way out is through. So, you're going to be in the same spot over and over and over again. You're never going to actually move yourself into that space that you want to go. And I do feel like we all eventually get there. We all eventually get there.
But you call it reincarnation.
I say this all the time, and I heard this from Dolores Cannon, actually, because people will tell me, oh, you're an old soul. And I'm like, yeah, old soul, slow learner, because I just keep coming back. And she had said that one time in one of her talks, and I thought, well, there goes my whole old soul, all this wisdom thing. That's out the window. It's just I'm a slow learner. So I keep coming back and back and back. And I think we're all afraid of the parts of us that have power. And whether that comes from our past lives, right? That maybe we abused our power, or we didn't do the best things with our power. And so we clamp down on ourselves. There's so much. This is true. We could totally have a whole other episode. Yeah, going down. But I think that what you're bringing into the world truly is something special. And can you tell us a little bit about your book, when you can anticipate it may be out, or is it still kind of in development?
No, I'm actually going to the last edit before it goes to my editor. My producer, or the publisher, said I needed to lose some words, so I need to kind of clean up some of the verbiage that I had. The book is called Ho'oponopono: Finding Peace in a Fractured World. So that was the name that we landed on. And I was aggressively thinking I was going to come out in the spring, but that's not happening. So my closest guess is that my goal is to have this out by the end of 2026.
Excellent. And where can people connect with you?
I will tell this to people. If you're interested in having a conversation, I will talk to anybody for 30 minutes. And so it's a way of getting to understand. And also, because the work is so deep, there's this place of building trust inside of that. So if you reach out to me at james@kawainui.com, you'll get me. But
Yeah.
you can also find me on, there's platforms, Instagram. I'm starting to work in TikTok and Facebook, and doing a little bit more work on LinkedIn for people that, connect that way as well. So, and
Yeah.
you can just go to my website, which is very simple. It's James Kawainui, KAWAINUI.com.
Yeah. And we're going to put all of that in the description as well, so people can go right to your page. Well, James, I could talk to you for hours, and I will probably bring you back closer to when your book comes out, because there's so much more that we can discuss. But I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming down here and having this conversation with me and sharing the truth about Ho'oponopono and about your culture and just about you. You're a beautiful shining light, and I know that the audience is going to adore your book and the work that you're bringing to the world.
Thank you. It's my pleasure and my honor to be here with you today and with everyone. And if there was a parting word that I would say to everybody, is that if there's one thing that you took away from this that changes what you do, then we've done our job.
Thank you so much for joining me on Call Cut with Angelique. New episodes drop every Friday. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, share with your friends. And remember, folks, no matter what life gives you, you must always keep shining.